I was one of 5 children. Born to Alice and Raymond Kratz, and I was born in Franconia, Pennsylvania, in the year 1935, and had a good experience in the first 8 years of school. And a pivotal event occurred when I was in the 8th grade, and the principal called me to her office, and she said, "Vernon, where are you going to high school next year?" "Oh," I said, "I'm not going to high school." She said, "Oh, but you are. You must go. The law has changed. I will speak to your parents about that." So that was a very interesting change of plan. Otherwise, I was thinking I'd be a farmer or something of that nature. But anyway, I did go to the Franconia Christian Day School, and then we got to 10th grade. And that was as far as the Franconia Christian Day School went. And then I didn't want to stop going to school. And so, although my father was not excited about it, he was willing to allow me to consider going to the Lancaster Mennonite School as a 5-day student. Then I learned how little I knew about the world other than Franconia Souderton. And one of the things that was really pivotal was that one of my teachers said to me, "Vernon, did you ever consider that you might want to become a doctor?" Now that was a completely new thought to me. So at any rate, I graduated from LMS, and then of course I was interested in going to college. The good news was, by September, I was on my way to EMC as a college freshman. And I did enroll in the pre-med curriculum. So it was a very interesting year for me. And from a faith point of view, it was kind of one of those faith-building periods. But it was also a period of struggle, trying to figure out who I am, who am I going to be, and God must have seen how terribly conservative I was as a young fellow. And I wasn't a challenger, but had a good first year, came back home for the summer, and I was greeted with the news that there was a draft for the Korean War. And therefore my 2 brothers who were at home were both drafted, and they were going to need to be away for their period of service, as they were conscientious objectors, as an alternative to the draft. And the other message was that I was expected to be on the farm for at least 2 years more. That was kind of shocking, stunning. Well, when I got through the disappointment, I really had a good 2 years at home, trying to learn how to plow a straight row with the tractor, milk cows. Now, my mother was a real major support. So at the end of 2 years, I was really interested in getting back to school. My dad was not thrilled with that. So I shall never forget the day my mother said to my dad in Pennsylvania Dutch, "Du musst hem gehen lassen." You have to let him go. And that was the last word. You have to let him go. And then part of the question was, where was he going to go? Until I met a friend who came to me and said, "Now I'm going to Eastern College. Come down and visit us." I had a good experience at Eastern College. Again, pushing out for pre-med. I was down. The 2 years that I was home absent really solidified my intent. I was pretty strongly motivated. I knew what I wanted. I knew where I wanted to go. And when I got to be a senior, through the interviewing process and so on, I decided to go to Heidelman in Center City, Philadelphia. That's when the pre-med thing really came alive. It was really a very good experience, growing, mixing with many different kinds of people, getting my first introduction to what it means to care for a patient, And through my experience there, I tended to be a little more conservative, and I wore the plain suit. I said, I'm a Mennonite. I'm not ashamed to be one. Then after I graduated from Heinemann with my degree, one needed to do a year of internship, getting into the nuts and bolts of practice and learning what it's like to be a general physician. So for that year, I applied to St. Luke's Hospital of Bethlehem and completed that part of my journey. So I was fully equipped to be a family physician. I was single for a long time. I said, now this is something I need to pay attention to, having a lady friend. And in the summer, I spent some time as a camp counselor. And while I was there, I met a young lady who was there for the summer. She was from Mount Joy, Pennsylvania. And I noticed her style, and I was sort of taken. She really knew how to manage, not thinking it might be me. Anyway, as I started my internship, I really did get serious. So I wrote a letter. And that was the beginning of a friendship. But in the last 3 quarters of that year, there was a major physician draft for the Vietnam War. Now what do we do? And again, as I was a conscientious objector, there was no problem. They just said, you have to come up with an alternative, a 2-year period that's acceptable to the government. And it turned out that I completed my internship at St. Luke's of Bethlehem on June 30th, 1964. We were married on July 5, 1964. And by September 2, we were en route to Ethiopia for a real eye-opening experience, a real major adjustment. This is the world. We were assigned to Nazareth, and there was an 80-bed hospital that the bishop was running. There was only one other doctor there, and he had been there for many years, a Dr. Aurora Eshelman. And he said, Vernon, you're here, right? You're not in the United States now. So he said, I'm going to be teaching you a lot about surgery because there's no one else here who's going to do it. So I'm going to teach you quick. So the issue of stepping to the plate, managing emergencies, trying to find your way, you just did it. And that really, I think, shaped me a lot. After we completed our 4 years, I was trying to think, what in the world am I going to do when we get home? The clinics were always busy, always more people you could really see well. And we had to see people pretty fast. So I said, I have some interest now in going into a specialty where I could take some time, spend some time with people. And while we were at Nazareth, they had asked me to speak on the mental health of missionaries. And I said, well, I know a lot about physical health, but I don't know much about mental health, and I wasn't thinking in that direction. So I thought, how do I prepare for this? So anyway, I sat down and wrote a letter to Dr. Loux. Give me some of your thoughts about what this might be. And he responded. So that kind of started me thinking about a different dimension. I said, well, maybe that's something I'm going to explore and see if that may be the future. So that's the way I chose to go. So we did arrive home. Norm had said he thought 2 places would be worth looking at. One was Temple. That's where I chose to go for my psychiatric residency. But it was so different than the hands-on medicine. This was really a redefinition of me and who I was. And in my Hahnemann yearbook, the little note by my picture was, Vernon is anti-psychiatry. And then I learned when I first got to Temple that my idea of psychiatry had to be much broader. And of course, part of the story is that 6 months into my residency, the mission board called us and said, we have an urgent need for a doctor in Somalia for 2 years. Would you consider? So we launched into that. Then we came back and I got into my residency at Temple again. And we got reacquainted with our stateside family.
Dr. Kratz reflected on his experience as a physician working in Africa and what that meant to him and how it really opened up his thinking and eyes to the fact that, this is a big world with a lot of diversity. And I think that experience allowed him to embrace that diversity. And he's always brought that acceptance and that welcome here.
We returned from Africa, and I went back to the psychiatric residency program at Temple University Hospital, and then was also beginning to look around at what I might be interested in. And having had 6 years in general medicine in East Africa, I was very interested in the physical side of things as well as the psychiatric side. And that was one of the strong attractions for coming to the Penn Foundation. I was very intrigued with the relationship with Grandview. The beginning of the Penn Foundation was closely aligned with Grandview Hospital. In fact, Dr. Loux's vision was that mental illness and the treatment of mental illness would be accomplished in partnership with the hospital.
People had gotten the idea that psychiatric patients could be treated and could get better. And they were beginning to develop an interest in community mental health. They felt that psychiatry should be more closely related to medicine. All of these were revolutionary ideas. And I can't help but feel that there was a generous spirit of responsibility for neighbor here in this community. And there was a kind of a unique blend of medical interest, community interest, and community leadership.
That's part of the soil out of which the foundation grew. There were pastors talking to Mike Peters and kind of saying, where do we go? We need somewhere to refer people who have these kinds of illnesses, that people wouldn't have to be sent away out of the community. I think that was the real genius of the foundation. It came from the grassroots. They didn't have to sell people. They were asking for it. And Dr. Loux was always very clear that he didn't want this to be seen as a Mennonite place. He says, this is a community for everybody. It's not meant to be exclusive. Everyone's invited here.
Somehow Dr. Loux communicated a vision to him that really stirred him. We would treat people with mental illness in this community. They could actually stay at Grandview Hospital while they went through their difficult times.
Psychiatric patients were being admitted to the hospital at Grandview. And so I came in as a staff psychiatrist, being both primarily here, but on the medical staff at Grandview, and actively involved in the hospital from the beginning.
I remember how excited Dr. Loux was in September 1973 when this new psychiatrist, who was from our local community, was joining the organization. We had about 30 employees. We had a weekly staff meeting where we all fit into the old library. We went over all the people that were in Grandview at the time and got what our assignments were for the week, and off we went.
That was kind of the schedule, 2 hours from 8 to 10 in the morning at the hospital, and then come over and see patients pretty much 50 minutes to an hour with each person. We were expected to be here 2 nights a week and saw patients. This is the reception hall in the original building. This was a very welcoming place. It had a warmth and a kind of comfort to it, and people really enjoyed this space. One of the exciting parts of the foundation when I arrived was what they called the day treatment program. On the lower level, we used to have our day treatment program, and that was a really very active piece. We would bring patients who were in the hospital, those who were mobile, we would bring them across, and they would spend time here from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, and then we'd walk them back to Grandview. And once a week they would often have a community meal, and we would go down and join with the meal and eat with the folks.
He became the medical director and president in 1980. I think that when Dr. Loux hired him, he had his eye toward the future and finding a leader to transition into his spot.
When Dr. Loux decided to retire, I was then appointed the assistant medical director, more responsible for the management, for the policies, more administrative. And then was another step when I was appointed to be the full-fledged medical director. At the same time, I became the chief of psychiatry at Grandview. So it was, again, that sort of management piece. And at the same time, I was always expected to carry a clinical load of my own in the office. One did not always relinquish things as one got more. It sort of accumulated. So then there were always these initiatives that we had to keep dealing with. When I was in my training at Temple, we were not trained to take addiction seriously. But on the ground in our communities, it was always an issue. And so we looked at being able to provide treatment for drug and alcohol persons in the unit that we occupied at Grandview. And then at some point, we began to say, we ought to think about maybe building a separate space that we can begin to more directly focus on substance abuse and addiction and be able to have that as an integral part of what we do, which we did. We built it. It was called the Breakthrough Center. And now, of course, look what it is. And at this point in time, I'm kind of proud of the fact that we identified drug and alcohol services as an important part of what we do. It may have been at that point that then the board appointed me as the CEO. And that was a real challenge for me because I wasn't trained to be a business administrator. I had to put on a different hat. Who I really was a clinician. So things sort of developed in bits and pieces. And one of the things that I feel really good about is we did decide that we wanted to do something about housing for single people who had disabling illnesses, who weren't able to live in the community but needed a place. I think these have been expressions of not just treating people, but actually looking out more actively for their welfare.
The ideas of psychosocial rehabilitation, kind of helping people aside from treatment, the idea that people needed to have full lives in the community, just kind of belong like everybody else. He was already in that mind frame when he came to Penn Foundation. And when we opened Wellspring Clubhouse, the idea was way ahead of what other people were thinking about doing.
That's exactly what the Penn Foundation's all about. Trying to help people regain the ability to lead constructive lives in spite of illnesses which have been a part of their lives. Well, it's been quite a journey. As I said to someone,
I think in that period of time when I was a CEO, what became clear to me and what became clear to the board was that administration was not my strongest suit. And that's when I made the transition from being the CEO and was appointed a member of the board. But so at that point was still the medical director. And then it was that John Gosler then became the CEO.
He was supportive of me from the very beginning. I always felt that he was a good example of a servant leader, and I would give him credit for the reason that many people here at Penn Foundation have been here for many, many years.
I feel truly blessed to have had the opportunity to work with him for over 45 years. He provided the leadership and the guidance and the clinical know-how for many, many program directors. We had a role model. People wanted to work with him because of the man he was.
That's one of his gifts, his ability to relate to and for people to relate to him in all roles. He's been a psychiatrist, a senior psychiatrist. He was medical director. He was president and CEO, and most recently he was a board member.
One day when I came to the foundation, there was this street sign out here on Lawn Avenue that said Psychiatrist Crossing. And it looked like a real street sign. I mean, it was a genuine street sign. I went on into the hospital, did my work, and when I came back, there was a group of people smiling, laughing, and a photographer, and they were estimating how many times I crossed from the Penn Foundation to Grandview over the years that I was active in the hospital. They were estimating that I had crossed Lawn Avenue 22,500 times. I'm amazed that I survived. When I stepped down from the CEO position and onto the board and went into more of a practice, that's really where a lot of rewards have been for me. There's a lot of satisfaction in being able to walk with people in their perplexity, some of whom I've seen over decades. This again is kind of where my heart is. Part of the caring for the patient is to care for the patient, and that's to listen, and that's to take time and try to put the story together and to kind of make room and to kind of be there.
He just brings his full presence, his compassion, his listening, his heart, everything in that moment.
Remember, sometimes you are the medicine the person needs. Just learn how to prescribe yourself.
He has an incredible sense of humor. He has great integrity. He has great kindness. He has a great sense of community. He's a man of faith. He's always incredibly optimistic.
I feel hopeful when I think of all that we've negotiated from 1955 until now, and still being a very, I think, important contribution to this community, providing much needed and appreciated services, and we go on.
More than 19,000 people were served by Penn Foundation last year.
The culture of this community is absolutely superb in how they have always cared for people. How do you instill that into the newcomers? That would be a feeling of tremendous accomplishment just to know that we could instill that into a new generation, that would happen.
I think that we stand on the shoulders of some remarkable people who for almost 65 years have delivered on the promise, the relationship that this organization's had with the community. And I think that my hope, our hope, is that we'll carry that forward.
To me, it's been a rewarding kind of journey. And the clinical piece, much more so. While I value my exposure to the management side, that's not where my heart took me, either when I went to Africa or here.
He just kind of listened to his heart, I think, and just went where his heart, where he was called, and then he brings all of that moment to moment.
I think Dr. Kratz's personal, professional, and spiritual life have all been integrated here at Penn Foundation.
That's definitely part of who I am. You know, it was more a vocation. It's not just a job. It was more like a calling. You know, always feeling like, hey, this is, in the spiritual sense, this is what God has really called me to do. The kind of person to be.